Welcome to the Inkwell, where we dip into our pool of knowledge and experience to share insights and best practices on the big topics that are affecting HR professionals. I'm Emily Miller. I'm the Director of Marketing at Purple Ink, and I'm going to be talking to some members of the Purple Ink team about leading through change. Change is coming at us fast and furious these days. It's more important than ever to have the skills to effectively guide our teams and organizations through that change. So, to get us started, why don't you two introduce yourselves to our viewers?
Hi, my name is Courtney McAuliffe, and I am VP of Consulting Services here at Purple Ink.
And I'm Peggy Hogan, and I'm the VP of Client Services at Purple Ink.
So, Courtney, what role does HR play in shaping the vision for change?
Yeah, HR has a really important role when it comes to change at organizations. They are by nature people oriented and people centered departments. And so their role is connecting that strategy and vision to people so that our team, our employees, our staff, they can see themselves in the change that we are initiating as an organization.
Yeah. And I think our job in HR is really to make the change live in people's day to day. So they kind of know what the clear outcomes are. They understand that there are fair processes involved in the change. And hopefully, we're that liaison between the company and the employees to really support them in adopting the new ways that we're going to be working or whatever changes are on the horizon.
So we know that as much as we would love them to, these changes and things don't always come up one at a time. So, Courtney, how do you help organizations prioritize changes when everything feels urgent?
That's a great question, Emily. And I think prioritizing is hard. Just like you said, everything feels like it is urgent. Everything feels like it needs to be done today, tomorrow, or even yesterday, right? And so some of it's about making sure that you're highlighting the impact on the strategy and what's really the capacity that your team has to absorb. If they can't absorb the change, then they're not going to be able to execute the change. And then it's going to fall flat or they're going to disengage. But I think also making sure that they're bringing stakeholders early to weigh in on the process. And those stakeholders are not just your immediate leaders, they're not your senior leadership, they're not your executive leadership, or whatever the title may be for that group. Think about the people that are directly impacted by the change, who's executing the role that's going to be impacted by any new change or process you're implementing. Have them weigh in to highlight, hey, this might be better in Q2 because here's why. And then you can really understand when the change will be most impactful based on the needs of the everyday team member and everyday position.
Another thing I think too is, it's always great to feel success early on. And if there's some low hanging fruit and you can kind of get to something that is high impact but low effort and start there, that can be a great way of prioritizing change. Obviously, it's ideal to have a full project plan with timelines and owners of the various components of the change. But even if you can just prioritize that high impact, low effort first, people will see the change and start to see the effects of it.
Yeah, and celebrate those wins when those changes have gone well, even if they're a small change and a small win that leads to great impacts, like Peggy was saying.
So, communication can make or break your change initiative. Peggy, what are the most common communication mistakes during change, and how can they be avoided?
I'm always saying communication is the root of all good and evil, and lack of communication is probably the worst thing, right? So I think the top mistake is really telling people what's going on without actually translating what's going to go on and what those impacts are to them. So if you're under explaining some of those factors, like how it's going to affect people, it's going to quite possibly get people thinking of all kinds of scenarios in their head that may never play out. And when we go through all this kind of drama in our own head about perhaps losing a job or changing a role or getting a demotion, we know that that adversely impacts our own productivity
Mhm.
and the culture on a whole. So, sort of under explaining is a problem. And then just that one way cascade that where there's no feedback route. We've got to communicate to understand, not just to kind of check that off that we've done the communication. It's got to be very meaningful and two-way.
So we just touched on this a little bit, but communication is a two-way street. So, Peggy, how can HR ensure that employees are feeling heard during times of change?
You can definitely design structured opportunities to get that feedback from employees and then show that visible response to them. So, one way would be to do short pulse surveys where people are allowed to actually comment and keep those comments verbatim. Those types of comments are very meaningful to us versus just regular survey kind of responses. You could keep office open hours for leaders. You could make sure that your leader is kind of walking on the floor a little bit more or meeting with small groups. But I know one time it was very impactful to me when I was new in the workforce and we had a new HR director. You'd call him a CHRO now. And he went around and spoke with everyone in the HR department. And it was a company with 17,000 employees. So their HR department was pretty significant. And even as a new recruiter, took the time to meet with me and kind of hear my experience and share, kind of what his thoughts were. And that was incredibly meaningful to me, as you can tell I'm mentioning it now so much later.
And I think on feeling heard too, it's not just kind of having those town halls, right? Or just a survey, which both have a really great time and purpose, but it's kind of that loop that you were mentioning earlier, Peggy, that's really like asking for information, listening, hearing, that information, acting upon it and connecting some of the, we've heard this, here's what we're doing, and here's what we've seen, so that it really closes that loop for folks so that they know based on your actions that you're hearing what they're saying.
Now we've got the communication down, but even the best communicated change initiatives can still be stressful. So, Courtney, how do you keep employees engaged and motivated during uncertain transitions?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question, Emily. And I think even the best laid plans can sometimes have bumps in the roads. And so, how do you continue the motivation? Because while you're having change, we still have our day to day that we're executing as well. And I think first and foremost, it's to continue to connect the work to your mission. How is this change going to impact what you do as an organization, your mission, your vision, your values? How does it link specifically to individuals and the roles that they're doing to cause maybe customer or client impact? And I think when you can connect that why to your what, it's really important in helping people feel motivated that there is a purpose. It's not just a change for a change, but here's why we're doing it, or here's what we hope to grow or do from that. I think also building time into your kind of change plan to have maybe learning opportunities or practice times. In the HR world, we tend to be really involved in, HR platforms or HRIS systems that give you what we call a sandbox opportunity to kind of play around and see what it looks like to process payroll before you go live with your new payroll system. And that's important of any change. It allows you to work through what have you not thought of, what could possible impacts be or implications be that we don't know yet because we haven't tested step 1, 2, and 3 to see how that could impact 4, 5, and 6. But I think, to our earlier point, celebrating the short-term wins, celebrating the progress markers, and where have you had some growth and some momentum in your change. And so knowing that it's not going to be done overnight, but, what do we have to celebrate today or this week or this month? And then lastly, make sure you're giving yourself some time and some grace to really create the new routines and perfect those new steps to whatever you're rolling out. That routine is what's going to give you some stability. And when you have stability, you start to get really anchored into your purpose or your progress. And so making sure that you're giving yourself time to do the changed motion a few times to really perfect it is helpful. Really highlighting and tracking over the course of kind of many efforts of your change and rollout will be helpful, and making sure that people know that it's a work in progress and that work in progress is absolutely okay.
Yeah, that's a great point, Courtney. And I think sometimes we do focus really heavily on the big change, the merger,
Mm.
the acquisition, the leadership change, right? And sometimes it is a systems change that everybody has to get on board with. And that's where those learning opportunities can give people a lot of confidence too. If it is a big change, like the merger, the acquisition, the new leader, again, I think that communication can help because we will see people start to jump ship.
Mhm.
And as people jump ship for greener pastures or what they perceive to be a greener pasture, we're going to see other people taking on a lot of work.
Mhm.
And that can have a really disengaging effect on employees when they're now being asked to do more work because they're in that interim period where maybe they can't replace that person.
Yeah.
So, if you can communicate about whether someone's role is going to be around and figure out a transition plan for them, that will give them a little more motivation. Maybe you've attached some sort of a stay bonus to it. So there's different ways to be creative during that change
Mhm.
without and being transparent with the employees who are there so they can really kind of come alongside and really help with that change instead of worrying about getting their next job.
Yeah, that transparency, that's a really good point.
Peggy, at Purple Ink, we are all about joy powered workspaces. So, how do you maintain a positive workspace culture when everything feels like it's shifting?
Well, I'll say the line that everybody says. It starts from the top, right? Leadership can certainly set the tone for this, but we each, and especially those of us at Purple Ink, who, Jody Curtis coined the term joy powered, we all bring joy into the space that we're in. So while that um, positivity definitely kind of comes top down. We all, as individuals, as group leaders, have that ability to kind of bring that into our workspace and kind of, just celebrate those wins that Courtney has said that we're doing whatever we're accomplishing as a team. Keep mentioning the mission and painting that vision for what's to come for employees. But, you've got to also model some vulnerability and empathy during change and understand that for some people, change is exciting. Other people, change is really maybe going to put them in a mode where they're disengaged or they're not able to be as productive as they would
Mhm.
normally be. So you've got to have some empathy. You've got to accept that there's going to be some mistakes along the way and address any of those hot spots really fast if there are different conflicts that come up. If there's escalation for problems, make sure that those situations get handled.
And I think sometimes in change, people get worried that their culture is going to change or it's going to disappear or it's going to shift. And what we find, especially in a lot of the clients that we work with and over the change that we've had, at Purple Ink over the years is that culture tends to be more revealed when you're going through change because you really lean into what you value most. And so, at Purple Ink, it's bringing joy. And so we know when we're having stressful weeks or when we've had a lot of things that maybe pull us out of our typical comfort zones and some of those change. And so we've built in ways that we can support each other. So we give shout outs, we give high
Mhm.
fives, we give updates in newsletters. And all of that speaks to the culture that, we've built at Purple Ink. And so when we're going through high times of change, that is elevated, not hidden, because we utilize that as a way to progress our change throughout the organization.
Yeah. And on a very individual level, you've got to say to yourself, are you the person that's going to come in and complain and waste time and create drama? Or are you the person who's going to come in and say, hey, what can we do instead of what can't we do? So, again, I think culture is uh, top down and everyone all around. And you have a responsibility for the culture that surrounds your person.
Well, this has been such a great conversation about change. Thank you both for being here and sharing your wisdom. And thank you all, viewers, for joining us to talk about change today. If you have any questions or you need some advice or training or coaching about navigating change, please reach out to us at Purple Ink. We would love to help.